My name is Rachel Graves and I'm the Visual Arts Officer at Attenborough Centre, the University of Leicester's Public Arts Centre. I'm a white woman in my mid-30s, I have long dark brown hair and I'm wearing glasses. In my role as Visual Arts Centre, I work as part of a team to curate a programme of exhibitions across the centre's 4 gallery spaces. Attenborough Arts Centre has a really varied programme across art forms, including theatre, visual art, comedy, workshops, creative learning courses. And our aim is to create a programme that is inclusive, representative and accessible, and that seeks to actively engage rather than alienate audiences from contemporary art. We want everyone to feel involved and welcome. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, the centre was very focused on creating an accessible and inclusive in-venue experience. So that is people coming into our spaces to take part and access our programmes. Then in March 2020, the centre closed like everywhere else in the country. And aside from a few short weeks in autumn last year, we remained closed to the public until June 2021. When we closed in March, like many museums and galleries, all of our usual ways of working with and engaging with artists and audiences just evaporated. And we were really left kind of asking the question, what do we do now? Slowly, we regrouped as a team and started to redirect our focus. Despite not being able to exhibit the work of artists, we continued to find ways that we could support artists we had been working with through virtual studio visits, micro commissioning projects and network development. But beyond that, a big question that myself and the rest of the team were asking ourselves was, how do we continue to support artists beyond the projects that we were already in the making before the pandemic? How has the pandemic changed what artists might need from an organisation like Attenborough Arts Centre? And the COVID-19 pandemic created a new and really significant threat to the continued participation of disabled artists in a sector that was already a really fragile environment for disabled people. So in autumn 2020, I began talking to the team at Disability Arts Online about the ongoing and additional barriers that the pandemic was creating for disabled artists. I wanted to find a way to offer some meaningful support to artists who were continuing to experience additional barriers to their practice, even as other parts of society in autumn were beginning to open back up and the first lockdown was easing. Disabled artists remained isolated and excluded. They were unable to access the development materials and networks that they needed to sustain their practice. So in those conversations, it quickly became clear that both Attenborough Arts Centre and Disability Arts Online could collaborate on a small programme of support. By pooling our resources, both organisations could develop something that went beyond what we would have been able to achieve individually. A grant of £1,500 was offered to 5 disabled artists based in the UK, along with a programme of meetings, development sessions and group conversations that were held over Zoom between February and July 2021. The artists were free to use the funding, however they felt it would best support their practice during the pandemic. And the artists were selected through an open call process. And I have to say, we were really stunned by the response that we had to that call. There were so many artists who applied that we wanted to support, but we had to, because of the limitations of the project, just choose 5. The level of response clearly demonstrated that much more support of this nature is needed in the sector. So the 5 selected artists were Lynn Cox, Bhavani Asapathi, Amelia Kerr-Beale, Sasha Sabin-Callahan and Jazz Singh. And over the course of 6 months, from February to July, Attenborough Arts Centre and Disability Arts Online met regularly with the artists. We had monthly meetings where we came together as a group to talk through the work that the artists were doing, as well as more informal conversation sessions. The programme also included one-to-one meetings where each artist met with staff at Attenborough Arts Centre and Disability Arts Online to talk through their practice in more depth and receive feedback and advice. It was a really fantastic project for Attenborough Arts Centre to be part of. In the course of our usual work, it's highly unusual for myself and my colleagues to be able to dedicate so much time and focus to working with artists without any specific end goal like an exhibition or a commission in mind. This event, hosted by Disability Arts Online, marks the end of the programme, but I know that I've learned things that will continue to inform and shape the work that we do at Attenborough Arts Centre, and I've been absolutely blown away by the energy that the artists brought to our meetings and the generosity that they showed in sharing and connecting with each other. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with each of them, and I hope that there will be more opportunities to work together again in future.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Joe Turnbull. I'm the Assistant Editor of Disability Arts Online. I'm a white man in my 30s with brown curly hair and a beard. I wanted to just echo what Rachel's already said, in that it's been a real privilege working with all of the artists on the programme, getting to know them and their works over a period of time. Throughout the event, we'll hear from each of the artists in the form of presentations and discussions, which I had with some of them over a period of a number of weeks, hence my changing appearance. We'll also get to experience some of the work that they created throughout the programme, and I hope you'll agree that it's a real cornucopia of delights. We've got some video work in there, sound art, publications, drawings, and there's even some elements of performance as well. We'd encourage you to interact with questions or comments in the chat function on Facebook and YouTube. Some of the artists are there responding, so they can get back to you if you've got any questions. And the first piece that we'll see is Jas Singh's Sabotage, or 5 minutes of the full piece. It's a durational performance piece with multimedia elements that basically consists of news footage projected onto the artist, who's tied up in a chair in a white outfit that also covers his face.
Warning: the following clip of about 4 minutes contains fast flashing images. It may cause discomfort and trigger seizures for people with photosensitive epilepsy. Viewer discretion is advised.
In the end, nobody wrong. Quite seriously wrong, actually. They sent me here. With funny fun.
Hi, I'm Jassing, and I've been currently working under the pseudonym of Sabotage, which is the live performance thing that I did with Disability Arts Online and Attenborough Arts Centre. To describe myself, I am a male, British male. Someone say in their late 20s, but actually mid-40s something. And I have a brown coloured skin, if that actually helps anybody. I don't know what tone it is exactly. So I do live performances, digital art, sound art, sonic sound art, and I'm also doing a little bit of video stuff. So yeah, everything apart from painting.
So the audience will have been lucky enough to experience a bit of a small section of Sabotage. It's quite a bewildering, overwhelming piece of work. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, it was a really interesting working with the cohort thing, because normally I tend to work on my own and I create my own sort of project briefs and stuff, but having conversations or listening to the conversations with everybody else, I kind of like sort of felt in a comfortable zone, or I felt it was sort of the right time for me to kind of address my some of my disabilities, which is I'm kind of sensitive to sound and light, and I thought I'll tackle it head on. So it's not necessarily autobiographical, but it's the first time I was kind of, even though I am talking about worldly politics and so forth, but how I see the world at the moment with the news and the media. But I was taking fragments from those clips, sort of narrating a story about myself, and also sort of what's going on with disabilities and the sort of superhuman philo code thing that's happening with obviously with the recent stuff that's been going on, and there's a lot of anti or pro, or people are sitting on particular sides, and everybody's becoming quite knowing more than the other person about the COVID scenario. Instead of shying away from it, I kind of wanted to use that as a backdrop, and to sort of just the sort of overload I've experienced sitting on my arse watching this for the last year, and how that's going to affect not only myself, but for people in the future. Having those segments, and the first time having the image projected into my face, so I was addressing how uncomfortable I'll be feeling with this projection. So I can't actually see the imagery of what's being projected onto me, but it's just light flashing into my eyes. Normally I'll play it live, but I decided to pre-record the soundtrack. But the visuals are on a random thing on the computer, so I don't know what imagery is coming up with the soundtrack. So, but also, I decided to constrain myself, and it's just the frustration and sort of being helpless in what I can do. And it's this sort of the idea of brainwashing, or being if you're under medical supervision and stuff, the feeling of being constrained and like your hands are not free. I did 3 or 4 takes, which are then cut and pasted into the actual performance. So the first time I'm tired, it's easy for me to kind of release myself, but as the 4th performance went on, it was really it just became sort of near impossible to kind of free myself, and the panic and feeling that this bombardment of freaking information coming into me, not only here and also hearing the soundtrack, it was just like unavoidable to escape it. And that's how I sort of feel. Well, that's what I'm trying to show with, not only with my disability, you can't escape things, you can try to avoid things, but also just the media, the sort of overload that we get from all forms of, like our phones, the laptop I'm talking through now, the TV screen.
And so you're kind of going through the pain and the overload yourself whilst making the work, but also sort of trying to convey that that sense for the audience as well.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the thing is, it's I did also kind of bear in mind the first time as well. It's like I consider people who don't necessarily have sight. So how would I then express that and compose a music score that would communicate with certain people of particular disabilities? But the overload and yeah, it's to show what I am going through, and it's sort of the first time I've actually done that. Because normally when I do performances, I don't highlight that, even though I'm going through that as a personal thing within myself. But this time around, it's kind of showing this is what I'm feeling with the movement and the motion and what's happening to me. It has been difficult doing things online, but that shouldn't be a deterrent. It's just a different method of doing things now. Because when it's a live performance, it's easier to, well, when I say easy, I'm more sort of comfortable with creating an atmosphere with the sound and the audio and the lighting and the feel of the room. Whereas trying to do that on a screen 16:9 or whatever the frame rate is, it's a new thing. So I was trying to put all that into it.
So would you like to perform it in front of an audience, or is it too much of an ordeal to do it again?
No, I enjoy the performance side of it. I really do. No, that will never. If anything, that's something that I need to do. The other thing with the work, I did actually originally record it in May. I've not looked back at it since, but it would be interesting to see the topics and the imagery I've used, the test of time. Because normally when I do a live performance, it's the muses of that moment.
I hope we get to see it at some point in a gallery near you.
Chapbooks were small, affordable forms of literature that were sold on the streets and covered a range of subjects from fairy tales and ghastly murders to news of politics, scandal or disaster. The images I make are a mix of the uncanny and the everyday. So when I discovered chapbooks, they seemed perfect for what I had in mind for this commission. The Book of Silk and String is 6 digital volumes of collage, photo montage, and textual intervention, along with integrated audio description. Each volume is a time capsule, and together they capture a year of the pandemic in Scotland. It's a strange record of the strangest of times. When the world we knew collapsed, our collective imagination flooded in to fill the gaps. The text includes some of my own writing, news headlines, random things on social media, graffiti around Edinburgh, and the rare conversations overheard during lockdown. The image here is of a defiant angel with a blooded nose. Sol Invictus was made in response to a Facebook post about walking in winter sunshine on the shortest day of 2020. The background is of trees around the lake in Lochend Park, and I often incorporate local landmarks into my work. I've been intrigued by attempts to link the virus with all sorts of unlikely things. This headline, Host Shifts and Honeybees, Lessons from COVID-19, sparked a germ of an idea, and the result is Queen Bee. Sometimes an entire image flows from one small component, and here this was the vintage coiled beehive that became the figure's headdress. Unclouded Visions was inspired by a nun-law dovecot near Haddington. I love the traditional kiln-like shape of the structure, and the notion of doves crowding around a central figure felt full of possibilities. Are the birds blocking the young woman's view, or enabling her to focus ahead and into the future? I'm a huge fan of fellow collagist Cold War Steve, and the book includes several satirical pieces featuring Boris Johnson and chums. Dido Harding's and Matt Hancock's shared interest in racing allowed me to combine two themes: their lamentable performance during the pandemic and horses. There are a lot of animals and birds in my work. Ponies, foxes, ravens and sparrows make frequent appearances, mostly because I like them so much. COVID-19 hasn't dampened down the debate around independence, and whilst the pandemic has raged on, so have the arguments about Scotland's future. The images here relate to a prediction by a top British astrologer that the UK would fall apart in 2021. The book straddles a dismal time, but there were definitely laugh out loud moments, this tweet being one of them. The idea of simply pretending not to know that lockdown had ended obviously struck a chord with thousands of people. It was a delight to create a tropical landscape, complete with an empty hoodie and of course a parrot. But the funny and surreal incidents were vastly outnumbered by heart-wrenching stories. The personal testimonies of exhausted NHS workers and abandoned disabled people, and the grief of bereaved families and friends. This article from the New York Times really hit home with me. The things left behind by COVID-19 victims range from the prosaic, bookmarks, mobile phones, a wedding invitation, to beloved pets and a 6-month-old baby. I hope that the Book of Silk and String plays at least a small part in ensuring that none of this is forgotten.
So we're now joined by Sasha Sabin-Callahan. So could you give us a real quick introduction to yourself and your practice to start us off?
Yes, sure. Yeah, I'm a visual artist and writer. Recently, maybe over the last 2 years, I've been using collage and photo montage to produce artwork that is a bit strange, and it's a kind of combination of everyday things and the uncanny, and it's meant to be a little bit unsettling and to make people see difference and beauty in things that are strange and extraordinary.
I was curious as to how you sort of first discovered chapbooks, and whether there was one that you kind of first came across, or whether it was a kind of internet trolling type scenario.
Oh God, well, I would love to say that this was something that was that sort of stemmed from really detailed academic research, but this would not be true. It actually stems from American Gods, Neil Gaiman's adaptation of his novel, and the series that are all being shown on Amazon Prime at the moment. Anybody that actually watches American Gods will know that at the end, there's always a different soundtrack for the final credits. And one of the songs just absolutely really knocked me out. It's a song called Little Margaret by a singer called Rhiannon Giddens. And I was so kind of inspired by this song, which is very strange, that I just kind of looked it up, saw that the very first version was from 1611, so it's a very, very old song. And from that, saw that there were chapbooks about it and thought, wow, this is really interesting. So it actually all started from Neil Gaiman and American Gods.
The beauty of Amazon Prime, I thought.
Yeah, well, you've got to thank Jeff Bezos for something. And I was just like, this song is just so, I do, sort of say to people, do listen to this song. It's most extraordinary. And it's my grandson, who is 9 months, his favorite song ever. And fortunately, he can't understand the words yet. when he does, he may be a bit unsettled by it, but do listen, everybody, and then look at the chapbooks, because it's a really, really cool thing.
And did you come across any sort of particularly interesting or weird or wacky subjects for chapbooks in the sort of process of researching?
Oh God, they're all pretty wild. Lots of stuff about dreadful murders, big scandals, quite a lot of political satire, even songs, and the whole idea of them were that they were a bit kind of sensationalist, kind of celeb stuff as well, and they were really quite a radical and a subversive, I suppose, democratic commentary on current affairs. And so that they're all yes, they've all got quite a nasty sensationalist, poking fun at authority kind of subtext to them, and anybody that is interested in things like that really ought to go and look at chapbooks, because they are endlessly funny.
I know that the sort of the process of putting together the book Silk and String was obviously quite an arduous one. Took a lot of time and a lot of effort. I wonder if you could give us a bit of insight into that painstaking process that you went through to sort of pull it together.
Oh gosh, it took a lot longer than I thought it was going to. I think I was very ambitious in what I said that I was going to do, and it began in quite I think quite a pedestrian sort of way, by just constructing a timeline, and really it was quite dull. It was just one of those, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and it was all around government announcements, and I was a bit like, I'm not too happy about this. And then I lost it all the work, due to my son, managed to completely erase the whole project. So I had to start again. And this time I thought, oh God, I'm going to make this a bit more irreverent and exciting and funny. And so I just went from being really quite focused on, sort of events as they happened, to taking things from social media, graffiti, conversations that I heard, people wanting to buy a monkey, all sorts of very bizarre things, and constructed a timeline that way, then did the illustrations. And at the time that I was working on the actual visual stuff, was also thinking about how I would embed the audio description into it. So altogether, it's about 190 main illustrations, main collages, plus supplementaries, plus the text, plus the embedded audio description. So it's actually turned into the equivalent of a Viking saga, really. It's become an amazing, complex, detailed piece of work. But it's been a joy to work on. I've actually loved doing it. I feel a bit bereft now it's finished, because, whoa, that's it.
Was there any material that you came across that you sort of considered including, but for whatever reason was maybe too close to the bone or too upsetting, or that you sort of thought, actually, I think it's too much?
No, actually not. I think I started off with a bit of self-censorship, but by the end was actually just so pissed off and angry at the way things were going, that really it's been, I think, an accurate reflection of things that people have thought and said during the pandemic. Some of it is very funny and some of it is very angry, and I haven't held back. And subsequently, the Book of Silk and String for this commission ends at book 6, but I've been given a subsequent commission to do book 7, and that's even ruder and angrier. And there are some things in there that I wonder how this is going to go down, but I'm still glad that I've done it.
That's great. I wonder what the future is for the Book of Swords and String. Like, what would you love to do with it? Would you like to take, what sort of context would you like to take it in? Are you going to bury it, seeing as you called it a time capsule, a la Blue Peter?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is a time capsule because it's the unfolding of the pandemic over a year, and some of it is stuff that, yeah, it's the headline events, but some of it is really just random tweets, random responses, things people have written in journals, and they're all stuff that needs to be preserved and kept, because it's going to be very easy to forget those kind of things. And I would like it just to, yeah, to be a kind of standalone sort of record of one diary of a plague year, really.
We're now joined by Lynn Cox. Hi, Lynn.
Hi, nice to be here, Joe. My name's Lynn Cox, as Joe said. I'm a visually impaired visual artist. My main practice is as a psychogeographer. I do a lot of audio artworks as well, a lot of wire sculptures, and everything I make has got the background of being for inclusion, equality and access. That doesn't mean all my work is always accessible to every person. I like to work on different layers of understanding, whether that's by touch, by sound, by having a transcript. That's really important to me. But it's also important to me that the artworks can be different. So somebody that's maybe deaf would appreciate it different to maybe somebody that can hear. I attended Wimbledon School of Art. I did a BA and an MA there. Last century and coming into this century, or millennium even, and I studied sculpture and site-specific sculpture, but I think I would actually really describe myself as a drawer, whether I'm doing a psychogeographical walk through London and recording it. For me, it's still a straight line, you know, whether you're going up steps and over things and through things, there's a line there. And it's the same if I'm doing complicated 3D sculptures with lots and lots of lines or wires, they're still line drawings.
Yeah.
So I think I'm very much a drawer at the background of it.
Yeah. So Lynn, why don't you tell us about your project, the socially distant skirt?
Well, it became really important to me during the lockdowns, how isolated we were. And an organisation I work for called Momomi Initiative, we work with visually impaired people, and we'd be providing tours at places like the Design Museum and walks around London and making them accessible to our visually impaired artists and art lovers. And it was stopped, everything stopped. You know, I got to March, everything had been cancelled. And myself and the gentleman that founded Momomi Initiative, Andrew Mashigo, thought, we've got to do something. You know, we've got to do something for the visually impaired artists, but we've also got to do something for ourselves. So we started a little group on a Monday. We'd meet for an hour every Monday. Started very early April 2020. And we'd all got different styles. We'd all got different interests. But actually, we were all profoundly affected by the pandemic in different ways. And one of the thoughts that came through from an awful lot of us was this thing about social distancing. Some people going out and getting told off for going the wrong way around supermarkets or not keeping 2 meters apart. Mm-hmm. We were discussing what is 2 meters anyway. How can you tell 2 meters? And I thought, well, the only way I'd be able to know what 2 meters is to produce a 2 meter wide skirt that goes around my waist, goes out to 2 meters, and I can always be clear whether it's behind, the front, the sides, 2 meters. And then I thought, the absurdity of it, that you wouldn't be able to get through gaps. You wouldn't be able to go up steps. You'd only ever be able to use the widest of widest pavements that are 4 meter wide. And like going through places like Leicester Square or Trafalgar Square, you know, walking through the park you know, what looks would you get using this skirt? But I thought, actually, it looks like a joke. It sounds like a joke. But there's a serious reason behind it. Because if you can't see, your guide dog can't tell you what 2 meters is. How the heck do you do 2 meters? And it also highlights all the clutter and all the mess we have on our pavements and in the cities, because, you know, you wouldn't expect a gap to be 4 meters. But a lot of our pavements, you can't even walk the dog and myself for the gap, which is often less than a meter, side to side. So it's kind of highlighting, you know, the issues visually impaired people have getting around, but also the fun we can make of it, and that we can sometimes, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but actually underlying that, it was a huge issue between all the 8 major artists that were doing this group talks.
Do you want to talk about a little bit about the format of how the piece sort of will be realised when it's complete?
Yeah, I'm slightly behind in making it at the moment. I've had a few issues, but I use a lot of copper wire, and I love using copper wire. I love the feel of it, the smoothness of it, the texture. And the copper wire I use is that, and I untwirl it, and I make a lot of sculptures using that. And I thought that'd be great, but also incorporate white canes in it.
White canes, yeah, okay.
Yeah, the white canes that visually impaired people use, and to thread them, so to dismantle white canes, and sometimes blue canes and different colour canes, because you don't just get them in white now for visually impaired people, and to actually incorporate that into the design. And then also using quite big light wooden beads to say words like isolate, social distance on the skirt. But obviously, if you don't know Braille, you wouldn't be able to read them. The issue I've got with it, if it's a 4 meter wide skirt and it's made of the wire, is lightish, but there's a lot of it going to go into it. And the canes are relatively light. They're usually carbon or aluminium, but actually over a 4 meter structure, that's going to be really heavy. So whilst designing it, I've had to incorporate like a vest, kind of over the shoulders kind of system to attach it to, because my whole weight needs to support it. So, you know, it's almost like having braces. And logistical details like that. So there's white canes there, and they're intermittent, but there's not too many of them because it would make it too dense. And also, while I was messing about with the logistics and the design issues, a lot of my wire sculptures are quite complicated and they're quite intense, and the wire, you know, weaves in and out each other, and it's really, you know, quite intriguing to look at. This one's going to be quite different because actually it's almost got to be an outlined wire structure. And then also making it, if I make it as a 4 meter wide, where the heck will I store a 4 meter wide skirt? So I've actually designed it in 12 elements, 3 per a quarter. Yeah. And then I've also designed it so it folds in on itself, so it can be stored when it's not being exhibited, because that's the only thing making something that big. And, you know, this is my new studio, but, you know, it's only 2.5 meters by 6 meters. So I need to be able to store it efficiently, and hopefully exhibit it in different places.
All the extra things that you never think about when you first conceive a project, aren't they? Especially storage. When it comes to larger sort of installation pieces, I know, having worked with artists before, everyone always forgets about, oh, what happens when we're finished with the project, and what do we do with it?
Yeah.
We've got to store it for how long?
It was one of the things actually I first thought of. How do I make it? How do I want to make it? Because very initially it was, oh, I'll do a huge 4 meter wide skirt. But as you say, not quite that easy.
Yeah. And accompanying the skirt, so if you were presenting the work, you'd have the skirt, and there's also a filmed element, is that right?
That's it, yeah. So I've arranged with a video artist, so when the skirt is finally finished, we're going to go into London. We're going to do an early Sunday morning, and we are going to go in, and we are going to do like by the London Eye in Jubilee Gardens, Trafalgar Square, some iconic places, and just showed the absurdity of me trying to move about in it. And I'm going to intermingle that with comments that people have given me and will give me via Zoom. So I was going to do a couple of interviews, and just how difficult they found the lockdown, and what is 2 meters to them. So it is going to have like a social commentary, but it's also going to be fun, because it's no good, you know, hitting somebody in the face. I don't know what 2 meters is. You know, I want it to be light-hearted, but just to highlight this and know that it's not just my voice, and it's not just other artists that are visually impaired voices. You know, I'm going to grab an whole load of voices from everywhere, and I've arranged with people, so I've got a whole group of people I'm going to do, and we're going to do some Zoom calls in the next month.
And so that that performative side of it, when you're sort of out in the public, being
That's
Dom Jolly,
scary.
or
that's
is that something you've done before?
I've done a little bit of performance work, but I would say it's performance work in making an artwork. So I often use ropes and pins and things, and I've done drawings on the wall using ropes and pins, and done like cyclists and things like that. And that's been like, you know, people have been able to watch me. I wouldn't say I called it a performance piece, but I suppose it was, you know, I mean, it takes me about 2 hours to do a decent sized wall drawing. Do you know what I mean? And they can see how I do it, how I measure it up, how I correct it. That's very different, I think, to actually moving about in something you've made and making a social commentary about it. I feel not anxious, but concerned. I'd say concerned about actually moving about. And also, I'm quite interested what people's attitudes are going to be like. I mean, I have to get looks, apparently, that, you know, what's that silly woman doing? But I think I really am going to get those looks. And part of me would like to, if we can, with the filmmaker, is not just to grab my movement around London, people's reactions to my movement around London, and whether they actually get the point I'm making.
Yeah.
Which I suspect they might not, but you never know. Some might. And any engagements, if people come up to me and ask, that's part of what it's going to be.
The material. Yeah, that's interesting. All right. Well, I think we'll leave it there, Lynn. But so thanks for telling us about the project. We can't wait to see the finished result, and I would just encourage everyone who's watching to keep an eye out on the Attenborough Arts Centre and DAO social media channels, because we'll certainly be promoting the work when we have the finished article. Yeah. So
and
thanks,
I'd like
Lynn.
to thank Attenborough and DAO for actually sponsoring me for this project, because it's reignited a love of art and actually making a heart and physicality of art that I'd almost lost. You know, I'd ended in an awful lot of coaching, which I love, a lot of training, which I love, but actually somewhere along the line I'd lost myself in making art. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
This is just a quick video of me making the skirt. I'm making it in 8 panels, and what I'm doing is I've used my maths to calculate how wide the base needs to be, the circumference, and then I've divided it by 8, how long the skirt needs to be going down, and I've also used the vertical from me going down. I'm constructing it on the wall in my studio, so I've put bits together and it's made of wire. I've got 1 cane on it at the moment. I'm hoping to put more on today. My studio is still a bit of a mess as I haven't completely unpacked.
Hi everyone, I'm now really glad to be joined by Bhavani Esapathi, one of the other artists on the Support Commission's programme. Welcome Bhavani. Bhavani, I wonder if you could start just by giving us a quick introduction to yourself and your practice.
Hi, Joe and everyone. I'm Bhavani Sapati, and I look brown, and I have long hair and a squeaky voice. I call myself a hesitant artist. I'm a writer. I'm a social tech activist. Much of my art has a social relevance to it, and I primarily work in digital media and storytelling and narratives, and they may sometimes take tangible forms to installations, to being very ephemeral and purely digital. Most of the themes that I work on are about invisible conditions, invisible disabilities, and the hostile environment, and how migrants are perceived and treated in terms of specifically with healthcare, but also in general.
Yeah, so Bhavani, I wonder if you could just tell us a bit about voice recognition, which is the piece that you developed as part of the support commissions program.
Yes, it's one of the many iterations, because when I came to this commission, I wanted to make something that helps recognize migrants' vulnerabilities and how can you share their stories without exposing them even more, which is most of what you see in the media about, showing someone who's either poor or in need, and it's always shown in a certain negative light, if you will. So I wanted to make something that merely tells things as it is and says how it's the same story, but because it's happening to different people and each of them are dealing with different parts of it, because I think there's this vast generalization that happens that's saying, oh, well, if they didn't want to be treated this way, they shouldn't have come to this country in the first place, which is, I mean, it's idiotic, but if we have to reason with it, then it's because people fail to recognize once you say, oh, they're, in this category, they're migrants, and then you think, oh, right, so that means they must have all of these characteristics that the media has been telling me for as long as I can remember. So I wanted this piece to kind of share different storylines of different people. However, we have made this into one storyline, but with different voices and some even artificial voices to account for those who deal with very similar stories. The one that you will hear is about how migrants are treated within the NHS. It's a real story, but the voices are completely different. So we wanted something to have that says, oh, this is happening to lots of people, not just this one person who managed to get some media attention, or not this, one good egg amongst all the bad ones, but to say, oh, if you're going to generalize about us, then you might as well know the truth.
And so it sounds, it's a kind of a combination of slightly universalizing common experiences and your own personal experience in some way, but also it sounds like it's massively about kind of challenging the dominant narratives that we hear around migrants in the mainstream media and things like that.
I think this has been like the most ethical artwork I've ever embarked on, if you will, because I had to first go oh, give me a story so I can make a cool work, and then take a step back and realize I'm doing the same thing that the media does for attention. and then say, oh, maybe you can just write it, and then realize, no, like, how was your state of mind when you were going through this? And it's almost insensitive for me, not just insensitive, like insulting for me to like ask them, go like, hey, I know you're going through all this, but like, can you do this thing for me, like write the stuff just so I could like make something that I think is cool. So I think, like I said, it's like an ongoing work, and I kind of see that the reflection of this might itself be like an extension of the work, of like the things that you quickly forget, or like what not to do when you are with a vulnerable migrant, which I think media institutions could very much use. Through every iteration, it's just made me more conscious of how best to present things, not for the work, but for the people it is representing or speaking on behalf of. I guess that's how I see my role as an artist, to make work that helps remind others who may never go through this to be able to understand it, that I hope will then actually reflect in how we craft policies and how we relate to each other and what we feel for one another out there.
It's great. Thanks so much, Ravani. And yeah, I think we'll now get a chance to listen to some voice recognition.
Everything you hear here is true, while at the same time, everything you will hear here may not be fully true. What makes something completely true, or who decides if a story is true or not? You do. You do.
Do you know anybody who has been
in a coma? Did you know there are different types of coma even? Not all comas are equal. There's toxic metabolic related one, which is often caused by infection and organ failure. Vegetative state, where there may be movements without full consciousness, and the most popular, medically induced coma, designed to give you the brain,
I was in a vegetative state when the Home
while
Office decided I didn't need NHS care.
Anyway,
Did they know
digress.
I was in a vegetative state?
I was in a vegetative
Did they plan this
state
in accordance
when the
to a
Home
time
Office decided
when
I didn't
couldn't
need
literally
NHS
stand
care?
up for myself?
Did they know I was in a vegetative state?
To do anything.
Did they plan this
It's
in
one of those
accordance to a
truths that
time
has
when
no
I couldn't
definitive
literally
version.
stand up for myself?
So which one
or
do you
even be
believe in?
conscious enough to do
I can see
anything?
it's a real struggle.
It's
for
one of those
who believe
truths
there
that
is
has
one
no
truth
definitive
and one
version.
right and wrong
So
way of
which one do
being
you
and
believe in?
living.
I
Life
can
doesn't
see
care
it's
to
a real
verify
struggle
such
for
minds.
those who believe
It's
there's
too
one
busy
truth
living
and
and
one right and
persisting.
wrong way of
After
being
my
and
6th
living.
consecutive surgery,
Life
I
doesn't
was
care
put
to
into a
verify
medically
such
induced
minds.
coma.
It's too busy living
No
and
amount of
persisting.
drugs could keep my brain at ease.
After my
As I
6th
kept
consecutive
waking up
surgery,
worried
I was
senselessly
put into a medically
if someone
induced
was
coma.
going to kick me out of the hospital.
No amount of drugs could keep
I
my
wanted
brain
to
at
sign
ease
so that
as I
the Home
kept
Office
half
could
waking up
reconsider
worried
my new
senselessly
application.
if someone was going to
Although
kick
I
me
don't
out
know
of the
what I was
hospital.
thinking.
I
As
wanted
this
to
would be the
sign
precise
so that the
reason
Home
we'd
Office could
argue,
reconsider my
I
new
was fit enough
application,
to be deported.
although I don't know what I was
the
thinking,
incongruity of my
as
drugged
this
up
would be
brain.
the precise reason they'd
It
argue
didn't
I
matter.
was fit enough to be
This ordeal
deported.
continued long after I was
Oh, the
discharged from the
incongruity of my
hospital,
drugged up brain.
with partial closure of my abdomen.
It didn't matter.
Yes,
This
partial.
ordeal continued long
My
after
body
I was
needed to
discharged
wait
from the
until
hospital
time
with partial
after
closure of
6
my abdomen.
surgeries to gather strength
Yes,
for more
partial.
surgeries.
My body
During this
needed
time,
to wait and take
the
time after
OSC's
6
visitor manager
surgeries to gather
at the
strength
NHS
for
Trust
more
decided to
surgeries.
grill me over
During
my
this
rights
time,
to
the
NHS care,
overseas visitor
because
manager
I had
at
only
the
been
NHS
living here
Trust
for nearly a
decided
decade
to grill me over
and
my
paid
rights to
NHS
NHS
health
care
surcharge,
because I had
along
only
with
been
my
living
national
here for
insurance
nearly a decade
contributions.
and paying
Of course,
NHS
this
health
doesn't
surcharge
entitle me to
along with my
NHS
national
care,
insurance
according to this
contributions.
visitor manager.
Of course, this
See what I mean? There
this
isn't one
doesn't
truth.
entitle me to NHS
This
care
manager was
according to this
convinced I was
visitor
one of those
manager.
dirty immigrants
See what I mean? There
sponging
isn't one
off the
truth.
NHS.
This manager was convinced I was one of those dirty immigrants sponging off the NHS, because who wouldn't live in this country for a decade waiting to have 6 life-threatening surgeries to only be told I need more surgeries afterwards, and that I'd need intravenous feeding because my stomach simply couldn't process nutrients the way
At
it
least
should.
that's how this manager saw it.
My cover was blown.
Thankfully for me, my
At
MP,
least
along
that's
with
how this
several other
manager saw
kind-hearted
it.
organizations and people,
Thankfully
were in
for
my
me,
corner.
my MP, along with several other
I am
kind-hearted
still living.
organizations and people
I
were
am
in
still
my corner.
struggling, and I will forever
I'm still
skip a
here, I'm
heartbeat
still living,
every time
I'm
I
still
get
struggling,
an official
and I will
looking
forever
letter.
skip a heartbeat every time I get an official looking
Because
letter
those were the fears
or hear
that
the
engulfed
doorbell
me
ring, because
while I
those
lay
were the fears
helpless
that
on an
engulfed me
ITU bed,
while I lay
unable to
helpless
speak,
on an ITU
unable to
bed,
move,
unable to
And
speak,
remain unable to
unable to
communicate
move,
the gravity
and
to
remain
which
unable to
this
communicate the
experience has
gravity to which
permanently
this
altered my
experience
very
has
sense of
permanently
being.
altered my very sense of being.
Is this true? Am I lying?
Is this true?
Was the overseas
Am I
visitor
lying?
manager lying?
Was the overseas
Was his
visitor
entire
manager
home office
lying?
mishap a big
Was his
mistake?
entire home office mishap
The
a
only
big
truth that
mistake?
matters is
The only truth that
complete
matters is the
insignificance
complete insignificance of any of these questions. It's the only truth anyone can grapple with, as the only truth that continues to exist are the fragments of disbelief every time someone hears this story, coupled with fractured moments that puncture through every experience, every emotion, and every iota of my existence, whether I'm aware of it or
whether
not.
I'm aware of it or not. Do you trust me now? Am I telling you the truth? Only you can make that decision.
Hi, I'm Amelia Kerbiel. I'm an artist born in Nottingham who is currently based in Glasgow. I studied painting at Edinburgh College of Art and I graduated in 2019. During this presentation, I'm going to talk generally about my practice and then more specifically about the project I developed for Attenborough Arts Centre and Disability Arts Online. I will be speaking over images, which are scans of works I have made. There are 2 different types of image, made using similar subject matter but very different material process. The slides in this presentation will alternate between these different works. There are 56 slides in total. The first slide and subsequently all of the odd-numbered slides are ink drawings. They are made by submerging thick white A4 paper in water and then using a thin paintbrush to draw wet into wet. A single or multiple dog/horse-like figures occupy the majority of the image, and the edges of the figure bleed and soften due to the wetness of the materials. Where there are multiple figures, they often overlap and blend together as they meet each other. The figures are always drawn in black ink, and some of the images are just black and white. On some there are areas of 1 or 2 colours, and other times it's as if a rainbow is surrounding the figure. The animal bodies appear to be in motion, perhaps running from or towards something, always moving from the left to the right of the paper. The next slide, and therefore all of the even-numbered slides, are drawings made using wax crayon and oil pastel on tracing paper. 2 sheets of tracing paper, both of which have been drawn into with crayon, are laid on top of each other and then ironed. The heat from the iron melts the crayon, and the images from each sheet of tracing paper are transferred onto the next. This produces 2 images, one is a reverse of the other. This process can then be repeated an unlimited amount of times to create a layering effect. Like the first set of images, these works are occupied by the animal figure, but many of them also use a spiral motif, which I use to think about connectivity, both within bodies and between bodies. Most of the figures are drawn in black, although some are red. In some of these works, the animal bodies are almost completely obscured by spirals, both large and small, as well as areas of colour. Due to some of the images being the reverse of another, these animal bodies are moving from both left to right and right to left. At the moment in my practice, I work with drawing, printmaking, sculpture and textile as a method of processing the complexities of living with illness, with particular focus on those deemed invisible. I am interested in the ways in which discomfort and pain coexist with pleasure and joy within a disabled experience, and I often try to make work that considers the way they overlap, leak into each other, compete with and make space for one another, and the subsequent tensions that arise from this push and pull. I work with an ever-growing collection of motifs, including animal bodies, spirals, and lines extending outwards, which I use to consider the ways in which imagination and repetition can be coping mechanisms. My research is rooted in queer theory and feminist disability studies, as well as lived and embodied experience. As a neurodivergent person, I care about centering neurodivergent ways of making and thinking as meaningful artistic approaches. My work is often informed by chaos, impulsivity, and a necessity of means, which are traits I connect with having ADHD. I am passionate about rejecting gendered neuronormativity and resisting notions of productivity under capitalism that permeate language and thinking around neurodiversity and disability at every level. And therefore, a lot of my thinking is about rest and the rested body. My original proposal for this project was to develop my drawing and printmaking practice, with the wider goal of creating my first publication in the form of an artist book. I was interested in these processes, especially drawing, as things that do not demand too much from me physically. I also wanted to find ways to make my practice easier on my body through supportive equipment and more gentle ways of making. My intention was to investigate fairly recent medical research that was emerging about the relationship between hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, ADHD and anxiety, or to put it another way, what is happening in my body, what I am experiencing physically, and what is happening in my mind. I do not differentiate between these things and view the two as inextricably connected, and this research is so exciting for me because it takes this body-mind approach. My intention was then to translate this research into a visual language. I was really keen to get going, but months of pandemic-induced understimulation and anger with the ways in which sick and disabled people were being treated left me at a bit of a loss. I found engaging with medical research particularly unpleasant at that time. It felt cold, distant, and didn't come even close to speaking for the complexity of feeling within what it was describing. I also found the density and sheer volume of information inaccessible and overwhelming, and became lost in terminology that was at once describing me and completely alienating me. Midway into the programme and deep into my creative uncertainty, there was an online session with artist Parminder Kaur, where the cohort and I were invited to show what we were working on and discuss it with the group, receiving feedback from Parminder. I hadn't really made anything I felt was meaningful at this point, so I chose to show an old sculptural work in which I used the figure of an ambiguous animal body to explore anxiety and the ways in which the sick body occupies space. Parminder offered some wonderful insights and encouraged me to think about the work in ways I hadn't previously. It then struck me that this motif, which resembles a spindly and fragile dog-horse figure, was saying almost everything I was trying to discover through research in a much more intuitive and embodied way. The works in this presentation demonstrate a very small selection of the works I have made since that conversation with Parminder Kaur. I wanted to think about the porous and leaky nature of illness, the ways in which different conditions bleed into and influence each other. I also wanted to introduce an element of chaos or unpredictability to my material processes, something that again resonates with my experience of disability. Both of the processes I used in these works are things I learnt as a child at school, so there is a kind of muscle memory to working in this way that felt aptly gentle and comforting. I think there is also something to be said about stimming when a neurodivergent person works with repetitive process. For me, there was a catharsis in the ritual of doing the same thing over and over, and I found it both stimulating and soothing. I was actively making, but my mind could wander and be led by feeling rather than a concern for form or composition, and I could relax into the familiarity of the materials and motifs. I thought this project would be an endpoint, providing me with the conditions to produce a tangible outcome, but really I think it's just the beginning, or perhaps lots of beginnings. I want to keep working in this way and produce a volume of work that might start to come close to the volume of feeling that comes with lived experience of illness. This project gave me the confidence to claim disabled identity for myself. I felt like I was always waiting for explicit permission, specifically within a medical context. But self-diagnosis is a deeply valid way of knowing yourself, and there is also power in not knowing. Working on a project over this length of time made me face some of the hardships that living with ADHD can cause, difficulty sustaining attention, or to put it another way, a love of that which introduces something new into your life. I struggled to maintain momentum for this project, but that's okay. I'm working on my own time, non-linear and spiralling. From these drawings, I hope to one day create the publication I originally proposed. I am grateful for the support and patience of both Attenborough Arts Centre and Disability Arts Online, as I developed and will continue to develop this project at my own pace.
So there you have it, a fantastic mix of art and artists, which I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. I'd just like to thank each of them for their contributions today and throughout the programme. And we'd also like to thank Rachel and the rest of the Attenborough Arts Centre team for working with us on the programme. There's a short survey which we're posting a link to in the chat. If you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit of feedback on today's event, then we'd really appreciate it. Over the next coming weeks, we'll have the finished works from many of the artists in the programme being published on Disability Arts Online and on the Attenborough Arts Centre website, so I would encourage you to look out for those. And so all that remains for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we hope you'll join us for our next event.